All right, so my name is Aimonetti, and I started working in France. And I moved to England really quickly, where I discovered a programming language called Ruby. I took the first boat and I moved to America, the best country in the world. Right. When I got to the US, I discovered that the work condition and the work condition in America is not that great. So after 6 months, I quit my job and I started as a freelancer, or as we like to be called, consultants. After a while, one of my clients hired me, and I started working for Sony PlayStation, or Sony Computer Entertainment America. And I worked on video games for a while, until I recently joined Living Social. And I work with Ben and a lot of really smart people, and we're hiring. I live in San Diego, California, so not really far away from here. And in my free time, as Kobe said, I work on MacRuby. I'm part of the MacRuby team. I wrote a book. The reason why I love MacRuby is because I like hacking on stuff, and I'm not running any Rails apps on MacRuby, obviously, but I like to play with it, so MacRuby gives me a lot of opportunity to do that. So let's talk about Ruby, because that's why we're here. When I started Ruby, Web 2.0 was cool. Back in the day, we were using Java, PHP, .NET, or Python, and I was working on a big project, and really wasn't going very well. So we were looking at this new programming language called Ruby. And it's funny because when I wrote these slides, I tried to remember what we were thinking. And this is the list we had. Ruby had very poor performance. Ruby had very poor documentation. Ruby had very poor tooling. Ruby had a very small community. Ruby was really unproven. Actually, people were saying, you cannot scale, well, no, thanks for saying that. They were saying, you cannot write big applications with Ruby because we don't know how to do that, and it's just not going to work. And on the other hand, on the pros, we had, it's a very cool language. It's not a very good argument, but really, I really like Ruby. Also, there was this interesting web framework called Rails that was really, would have saved our butt on the application if we had more conventions, and that's all this cool stuff. And yeah, the video and everything else, that sounded very interesting. But there was also this focus on tests. Tests, for me, were quite important, and I was thinking, wow, that's great to see a community that's really embracing tests and telling me that I need to test my code because I'm a bad developer. Also, it was not PHP, Java. So it turned out I adopted Java, and since then I've been writing code in Ruby, sorry. And I've been writing Ruby code. And if we fast forward to 2012, and we look at Ruby, we can see that Ruby has some better performance. Still not great, but it seems to be working great for a lot of people. It has great documentation. I almost didn't put that, because if you look at the Python community, our documentation is not that good. It's actually pretty bad. But compared to 2005, we have a lot of books, we have a lot of tutorials, we have a lot of videos, we have a lot of great things. We have training, lots of training. Jeff is always saying he gives the best training in the world. I don't know if that's true. But we apparently have the best training in the world if you're in the Ruby community. We have better tooling, and we saw some of the examples this morning. It's still not great, but we're making progress. We have a huge community. I asked on Twitter, and somebody told me we had 327,684 Ruby developers. I guess he counted, I don't know. But yeah, we're really big. That's probably not a real number. It's also proven. So when we started with Ruby, nobody really was sure if you could do something good with Ruby. And based on my own experience and looking at other people, I can tell you that you can write big, fast applications in Ruby. It might not be easy, but you can do it. And finally, Rails is the new PHP. Whoever wants to write a new web application, they will more than likely look at Rails and say, I should probably do it in Rails. Maybe they should not, but you know, Rails is the new PHP. So I think we can all agree that Ruby is the best programming language, right? Can I see some hands? Right? Wow, that's not everybody. I'm surprised. It's RubyConf. You guys like coming and you don't believe Ruby is the best language? Can I see some hands? Best programming language? Thank you. So who can prove that it is the best language?
You.
Nobody? Well, no, you can't. Well, the truth is, you cannot prove that a language is better than another, because it is not science. And you cannot make a decision, you cannot basically say that a language is better than another just because it's better. You don't have any real arguments. So, as I was thinking about that when I was writing my slides, I was thinking, well, if it's not science, is it religion? I mean, we're in America, right? The country of religion. So, what does that mean? Well, religion really means that people get together and they see things through the same worldview, and they apply the same values. And then I looked at how we speak, and this is what you will see in a lot of blog posts and people talking about fanboys and fanatics, about community and evangelism, about the Ruby way and the Rails way. Like, there's only one. We have also the secret hand gestures, and you guys might not know that, but it's really secret. So if you do 1H, you need to do the hash rocket sign, and if you do 1.9, you do the colon sign. And next time you see Aaron Patterson, Tenderlog, just see him and do like that, he will understand right away. Also, the Python guys don't have that. We also do this kind of bashing of other communities, and we like to say that we're better. We like to say that other people are doing wrong. Actually, we even apply that to ourselves. We always say that this library is doing it wrong, or you don't know what you're talking about, or you should do REST the right way, not the wrong way. So, is it really a religion? I went back and I read a book. I tried to finish the book. I never finished it, and I'm really ashamed of that. That's why I'm telling you today, so I will be forced to finish this book. SICP is probably one of the best programming books I heard of. That everybody told me was great, but I cannot finish. And there's this quote in the preface, so at least I read the beginning. It says, "I hope the field of computer science never loses the sense of fun. Above all, I hope we don't become missionaries. Don't feel as if you're a Bible salesman. What you know about computing, other people will learn. Don't feel as if if the key to successful computing is only in your hands." And then I was thinking about these quotes, and what really the smart guy is saying is that, one, even though he's really smart, he will not be able to solve all the problems in computing science, and that it's kind of useless to just advocate what you think is right, because you might not be right. So I think really it's not a religion. Picking a language and choosing a language over another one is not a religion. It's probably more of a philosophy. And when we think about philosophy, we think about the philosophers. All these people, especially the French people and the Greek people, I don't know why, I'm just saying that, but these people who came up with these ideas, and they thought a lot about it, and they tried to apply their thinking. And if we make a comparison to our world, we have these language designers. We have these smart people who decided to write their own language. And they started by defining values, things that for them is very important. And then, once they had these values that they probably developed before they came up with the language, then they chose problems to focus on. So they chose these problems, and they said, these are problems that are important to me. And then they defined objectives. And based on these objectives, they made choices. And these choices ended up giving a certain cost level for different things. At the end of these different steps, they had the implementation, and you can look back at it and you can say, well, it was a good or a bad decision based on the values that were defined. So if you understand the framework of reference, if you understand the thinking behind the programming language design, the design of the language, then you can make a proper evaluation, and you can say, this was the right choice based on these values. Now, I might not share the same values, but that was a decision that was made, and it makes sense for this designer. So, we can basically summarize all that by saying you need to choose the right tool for the job, which I really love this thing to say. People come to me and they ask me, what should I do? Should I use A or B? And I just tell them, choose the right tool for the job. And I mean, you can apply that to real life, right? Like pizza. I love pizza. Do you guys love pizzas?
Yeah.
Right. Pizzas are really good. Not really in America, but in Italy they're really bad. In New York too. In Chicago they're not bad, but they should not be called pizzas. So that's a different story. So when you have a pizza, a big problem with pizzas is you have to share them. And I mean, it's a cultural problem, I know, but you have to share them. So how do you share a pizza? Do you use your hands? I mean, this is the easiest way to share a pizza. You just, tear it apart. Well, the problem with that is that it's not very hygienic, but it's very efficient, but it might burn your hands. So, well, you might use a knife, because, you have a knife probably in your kitchen around you, so it's an easy tool, you can use it. Well, this is not really designed for that. So you can use the pizza wheel, because the pizza wheel was designed by one guy. I imagine this guy in his pizza, in his house, looking at pizza and thinking, I need to cut my pizza very well. I want it exactly, I mean, it was probably a software developer or something like that. I need the right tool. The knife doesn't do it, the hand, it just doesn't work. And he came up with this tool. The problem is that you now need to spend like $10 or $15 just to buy a pizza wheel, and then the only thing you're going to do with this pizza wheel is cut your pizza and play with Play-Doh if you have a kid. But you should not do that, it's kind of nasty. But my personal favorite is to use scissors. I love cutting pizzas with scissors. I think it's the best tool for the job. So at the end of the day, even something as simple as sharing a pizza is not easy. You have many options. And you will not convince me that it's better to use a pizza wheel than my scissors. Because we value different things. And because I'm right, you're wrong. Maybe not. So the point is that when people tell you, choose the right tool for the job, it just doesn't make sense. Don't ask them what they mean by that, and in what framework of reference. So let's go back to Ruby, because that's what we're here to talk about. So this man, Max, wrote Ruby, and when he was designing the language, he had different values he really wanted to express through the design. And the first one was actually expressiveness. He wanted his language to express something different. He believes that a language will influence the way you think and therefore the way you write. And it's very true. When I speak in English, the way I will think is different than when I speak Spanish or French. It's very different. It's very weird for people who don't speak different languages. But basically, if you think about programming languages, when you write code in Java, you will think about prompts in a different way than when you write Ruby. And that's really what Max was saying. Then he was saying, well, we need to have harmony and consistency. You could basically guess what the compiler will do, or you can write a language that So you can basically write a language for the compiler, and you can try to guess what the compiler does. Or you can try to have a language that's consistent, so a developer coming to the code and knowing a bit the language will be able to guess what's going on. The thing is, you cannot pick two. You cannot optimize for the compiler or for the human. And in this case, in design, Matt was trying to go for the human. He also believed that freedom was important, but with guidelines. So if you do Python, if you write any Python, or if you did in the past, in Python there's something very interesting, is that by design, usually you have only one way of doing one thing. And it's something that by design was done like that. So you can argue that it's good or it's bad. But Matt said, this is very interesting in my case, because I don't think I can impose that onto anybody. I want to give them the freedom to do it another way. Or I could say it differently. I could say, I want to let people doing it the wrong way. And if you look at Rails, actually this is what Rails did. Rails, I'm not saying Rails did it the wrong way. I'm saying Rails did not do things the way Matt intended them to be. So Matt gave the opportunity for developers to abuse the language. I mean, I should not say abuse, but to really enjoy the freedom and do whatever they want with it. And that's part of the design. And finally, what we heard throughout the day and what we all know is that the goal of Ruby, of the language, is to make programmers happy. So the problem is if you stop here, you're missing the end. The reason to be happy is so that you can focus on the end result. It's not just because Matt wants you to be happy. There's actually very little value in you being happy just writing code if you don't actually produce something. But again, the main reasons for the design, main values were not performance. Maths never really cared about performance. And that's maybe why Ruby is not the fastest language on earth. It's also not about simplicity. Ruby is actually a quite complex language. And the goal was never to make it simple. It was also, it didn't try to make another PHP or trying to be web-oriented. It really, that's not part of the values. So, thinking about the Ruby process, if you look back at all the other languages, and you learn them a little bit, you understand that they have different values. They have different expectations, and they try to solve different problems in a different way. In French, we have a saying that says, les goûts et les couleurs ne se discutent pas, which could be translated in English more or less as, don't argue about taste. Well, actually, it's not the right translation. The translation would be, colors and tastes are not to be argued. What that means in our context is that we should not argue about taste, but we should really argue about use cases. If you like blue and I like pink, it doesn't matter. You can tell me that blue is better because it's like the sun, or like the sky, and I can tell you whatever about pink. I don't like pink, I don't know why I chose that. But the point is that if we try to argue about the values, we won't be able to have a very long discussion because we're going to be stuck. However, if we try to be objective and look at use cases and values and references, then we can move on to maybe not agreeing on something, but understanding each other. So, there's this expression in English that I never really understood. There's more than one way to skin a cat. The first time I heard that, I was really concerned about what you guys were doing to the cat. I mean, I know that you have this belief that Chinese people eat cats, but why would you use an expression saying to skin a cat? I don't know. But my understanding is that this means that you can do one thing in a different way, right? So, I still don't get it. But whatever. So if there are many ways of doing one thing, at the end of the day, what's important is that the business value is in what you deliver, not how you deliver it. It's not about the internal construction. It's not about the implementation. And it's funny for me to say that. I showed these slides to Jeff earlier last night. And he was telling me, well, this is weird you talking about that, because usually your other talks, you're talking about performance and optimization and how to get awesome throughput and talking about the garbage collector and stuff like that. But what I'm trying to express to you today is that it doesn't matter what you do if you cannot deliver business value. And if you want to deliver business value, you should consider what you're delivering, not how you deliver it. But once you know what you want to deliver, you can focus on how to do it. So my point for you today is that it's time to get out of your bubble. It's time to think outside of where you're stuck. So we're all writing Ruby, or more or less all of us are writing Ruby. How much longer do you think we're going to be writing Ruby? I mean, if you look at the way what you guys are writing, right? Are you guys writing web apps? Most people probably write web apps, right? Alright, so web apps, I don't know if you noticed, but most of the logic in the view is now being moved to the client. We're writing more and more JavaScript. We're trying to get the client to do a lot of computation for us. We move all of that. Well, that means less work on the server side, and Ruby doesn't run on the clients. So how much longer do you think you're going to be able to write Ruby? 1 year? 2 years? 5 years? 10 years? That seems... I don't know about that. So there's this shift, and I don't want to assume anything. And I believe Ruby is currently my favorite language, which doesn't mean anything, but that's the language I like the most. But if you think about the future, you should know that you're not going to keep on writing Ruby forever. There will be a time where you're going to do something else. I'm sorry to break it to you. So be curious. Look around. Be smart about it. Don't just get stuck saying, I know Ruby, I'm good with that, Ruby can do all these things. Look around and try to think about the values, not the syntax. I think Ruby is a great language. We're looking at the syntax and we love it. But you should not think about that when you consider other options. Look at what they're bringing, the values. Look behind the code that you see on the screen. Also, focus on what you're going to deliver, not on what you like. I know it's a bit hard, especially when you work in a bigger company and you don't really have ownership over the product, but think about what's best for the products, for the end products, the thing that you're going to give to your consumers. Because the reality is, all the apps you guys are writing, you could have written them in PHP. Even in Perl, I'm sure that you would have worked. It doesn't matter. The end result is the same, is what matters for the customers. Ruby makes it nicer for you, you might have spent less time on it, you might have better tests, you might get paid more, I don't know. But at the end of the day, when you consider options, don't think too much about what you like better. Think about how that would serve your products. So let's take some concrete examples. Let's talk about CoffeeScript. That's an easy one. So CoffeeScript is a language that was written by somebody coming from Ruby, and he needed to have JavaScript code, but he didn't really want to write JavaScript, and he believed in the values we defined earlier, Ruby values. And he said, well, I can take these values and I can apply them to some sort of compiler language that will come on top of JavaScript that will let me keep on using the values I always liked, but apply that to JavaScript, which is what I really need because that's the only option I have. And if you look at it, it makes it easy for you to transition, to start thinking, well, I can write CoffeeScript, I have the same advantages as Ruby, or more or less. I have the same values, but it gives me something else. It's also built in inside Rails 3, so it's pretty easy to use. It's actually really, really easy to switch and to learn CoffeeScript. We had a hackathon 2 weeks ago in DC at Living Social, and I was working with Anthony Eden from Simple DNS, and we decided to do some JavaScript, and we picked CoffeeScript, and he had never looked at CoffeeScript in his life. It was the first time. It took him about 15-20 minutes to pick it up. So granted, Anthony is really, really smart, but let's say it would take you twice that amount of time. Let's say an hour, that's actually not that bad. But it would basically give you an opportunity to get out of your language that you're used to and think differently. You can also mix and match. You can have JavaScript inside CoffeeScript. You don't have to have your entire application written in CoffeeScript. So you really don't have any excuses to not look at it. The thing is, if you start using CoffeeScript, quickly you'll say, hey, why don't I use Node.js? And it's interesting because Node.js is this thing that people seem to love or hate. You cannot do Node.js if you do Rails. Or if you start doing Rails, you have to stop doing, if you start doing Node, you have to stop doing Rails. You cannot do both. And you have all these people, I was reading a blog post this week, a guy from Scala was writing out how he hates Node, and it's just the worst thing ever. It's like all this just rant about it. And I was thinking, well, maybe he has some good points, but he didn't really talk about what's the use case for it, and when does that make sense. And I'm not telling you you should use Node.js, but I'm not telling you you should not use it. I'm telling you, look at it. Look at it at why people seem to like it. Well, it gives you an opportunity to have a single language, both on the front end and the back end. That can be interesting. It's also designed for async operations. It will focus on non-blocking IOs. It has a great community of people who seem to be really excited about it. And it's fun to do something else from time to time. The good use cases for Node, in my case, is when your app is IO bound. And that's when you do a lot of IO operations and you use TLMRI, and you basically have problems with that, and you have these long connections that stay open, and you really have issues with IO, and you want to basically change the way you're doing it, but you don't want to do it in Ruby. I don't know why. I don't want to argue that too much, but another good point is when you want to do async calls. So that's the case with Facebook. If you have an API and basically people talk to you and you need to talk to Facebook and you need to wait for them to reply, which can take up to 4 seconds sometimes, and then to get back. Node.js with its evented IO approach is a good system for that. If you want to write APIs, it's actually really, really easy to write simple APIs with Node. If you need to do streaming, it's also pretty simple. So look at it, but instead of just saying, oh, I really don't like that, look at it and say, oh, I can see how that could be useful in this specific use case. The next one I want to bring to you is Clojure. So Clojure is a functional language. It's a schema implementation on top of the JVM. What's interesting with Clojure is that you have this Java interrupt, which means that you can talk to any of the Java libraries So it's more than just a scheme. You basically get a scheme, but you get access also to all the libraries, so it makes it much easier to write and to deploy. He has a community of very smart people working hard on it. And what I really like with Clojure is that it gives me a different perspective. I don't think I could say that Clojure is better or is worse, but when I try to solve a problem using Clojure or using Lisp or scheme, it forces me to look at problems in a different way. And this is a very, very helpful thing to do. The good use cases for Clojure would be if you want to write APIs. For performance reasons, actually, it can be quite fast because you have these immutable types. The code is also much, much simpler. Usually, they really try to keep you in a very small design. You can really get really, really high concurrency also with Clojure. So look at it, come up with your own solutions. If you want to get started, there's actually this GitHub project that is a series of kata, and that's basically a lot of examples where you need to come up with the solutions to teach you the language. You have Ring, which is kind of like Ruby's rock. You also have Composure, which is a little bit like Sinatra, but not really. I would really recommend these 2 books. These are the only 2 books I read, so the other ones I don't know if they're good or not. 7 languages in 7 weeks covers a lot of different languages. I think that's a good book if you're interested in learning new things. That's a really good book to get started. It gives you an idea of why other languages, what problems other languages are trying to solve, and they give you an introduction to it. Practical Clojure was a good way for me to get into Clojure. So my point, what I really want you to remember is that we're not in a crusade. None of you signed a deal saying that you have to write Ruby until the end of your life, and that Ruby, you have to say that Ruby is the best language in all cases. But more than that, I want you to consider yourself as not a Rails developer. You're not Rails developers, please. Maybe you Ruby developers, but not even Ruby developers. Why do we need to say we're Ruby developers? We are developers. But developers, it doesn't really mean anything. We're probably problem solvers. We're trying to solve problems. But if we solve problems and there's no end result, it's useless. So I want you to think about yourself as product builders. You're building something, and what you're building is a product. And if you compare this slide, product builder, and Rails developers, you can see that there's a world in between. You're still the same person. It's just the way you're going to call yourself. And yeah, it could be called corporate bullshit, whatever you want to call that. But think about it. Just take a minute and think about it. And if you think about it, you would realize Ruby is just a dev. So be ready to move on whenever it makes sense. Thank you.